"Excuse me, sir?" The boy's voice was barely audible over the hum of the emergency room. Too quiet, too polite. He stood at the intake desk of St. Margaret's Hospital, fingers curled tightly into the sleeve of an oversized hoodie, as if trying to disappear inside it. He looked small in the harsh fluorescent lighting, smaller than his 10 years should have allowed, like the building itself was swallowing him whole. "I think something's wrong," he said again, a little louder this time. The nurse didn't look up. She was typing, clicking, scrolling through a screen filled with names, codes, numbers that decided who mattered first and who could wait. She had already been on her shift for 6 hours. Her coffee was cold, her patience thinner than she wanted to admit. "Take a seat," she said flatly. No eye contact, no questions, no concern, just 3 words that quietly sealed his place in the room. The boy hesitated. He pressed a hand against his chest, feeling the tightness he didn't have. The words to explain. It wasn't sharp yet. Not unbearable, just wrong, like his heart was struggling to remember how to beat properly. "But it hurts," he whispered. The nurse sighed, annoyed now, and finally glanced up. He saw it in her eyes before she looked away again. The judgment, the quick scan of his clothes, the scuffed sneakers, the absence of a parent, the way his hair stuck up like it hadn't been brushed in a while. "Have a seat. Someone will call you." This time, the words were firmer, final. The boy nodded. He always nodded. He turned and walked toward the row of plastic chairs lining the wall, each one bolted to the floor like they were afraid someone might steal them. He chose one near the corner, away from the television, away from the loud man complaining about his ankle, away from the woman arguing on her phone. He sat down carefully, as if making noise might get him in trouble. And that was how he began to wait. If you've ever wondered how a child can disappear, in a crowded room, this is how it happens. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with indifference. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 9:42 p.m. The boy watched the second hand move, each rotation feeling longer than the last. His breathing was shallow now. He focused on keeping it steady, just like his grandmother had taught him. Slow in, slow out. He rubbed his wrist absent-mindedly. Around it was a bracelet, old, faded, medical. He never took it off. He had promised. 5 minutes passed, then 10. People came in holding their arms, their sides, their phones. Some groaned loudly. Some demanded attention before they even reached the desk. Most were adults. Most were confident. Most knew how to make themselves seen. They were helped quickly. The boy was not. A man limped in dramatically, claiming he couldn't put weight on his foot. He was laughing with the nurse within minutes. A woman complained of dizziness and was immediately taken behind the doors. The boy stayed seated. He didn't want to bother anyone. The pain in his chest shifted, spreading slightly down his left arm. His fingers tingled. He flexed them, trying to make the feeling go away. It didn't. He swallowed hard. His grandmother's voice echoed in his head, warm and firm. "If something feels wrong, baby, you tell someone." He looked back at the desk. The nurse was gone now, replaced by another, younger, scrolling on her phone between patients. The boy stood slowly, testing his balance. His legs felt weak, but he managed. He took 3 small steps toward the desk. "Excuse me," he said. She looked up, irritated. "Yes?" "My chest, it's getting worse." She glanced at him, then at the screen. "Sit back down. We're busy." That was it. No follow-up. No questions about how long, no vitals, no urgency. Just another dismissal. The boy turned back toward his chair, cheeks burning with embarrassment. He felt stupid now, like maybe he was exaggerating, like maybe this was his fault for coming here alone. He sat down again. This time he hugged himself slightly, trying to keep warm, even though the room wasn't cold. Behind the desk, the first nurse returned, setting down her coffee. "Kid still here?" she asked the other. The younger nurse shrugged. Yeah, probably anxiety or something. They didn't lower their voices. The boy heard every word. He stared at the floor, tracing the cracks in the tile with his eyes, pretending he hadn't, pretending it didn't hurt. Anxiety. That word followed him like a shadow. People said it about him at school when he needed to step out of class, when he asked to sit down during gym, when he went quiet for no reason anyone else could see. You're fine, you worry too much, it's all in your head. He wished they were right. Another wave of pain hit him, stronger this time. He sucked in a sharp breath before he could stop himself. A janitor pushing a mop cart paused nearby. You okay, little man? He asked gently. The boy nodded quickly. Yes, sir. The janitor hesitated, then continued on. He had a job to do, everyone did. The boy checked the clock again. 9:58 p.m., 16 minutes. His head felt light now. The room seemed louder and farther away at the same time. He focused again on his wrist, on the bracelet that scratched lightly against his skin. His grandmother had insisted he wear it even when kids teased him. Why do you have that on? They'd ask. He'd shrug. She'd knelt in front of him once, holding his hands. This bracelet tells people something important, she'd said, but only if they bother to read it. He didn't understand then. He was starting to now. The doors to the ER swung open again. A man in a white coat walked briskly through, speaking quickly to a nurse beside him. Confident, in control, the kind of person people trusted instantly. The boy watched him pass. He wanted to call out. He didn't. He didn't want to make trouble. The pain tightened suddenly, sharp enough to make him gasp. His vision blurred at the edges. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to steady himself. No one noticed. At 10:03 p.m., the boy slid sideways in his chair, not dramatically, not loudly, just down. His body gave up before his voice could. His shoulder hit the floor with a dull sound. A woman screamed, "Someone help him!" Chairs scraped back. People stood up. Suddenly everyone was moving. A nurse rushed over, then another. "Oh my God," one of them said, already checking his pulse. "He's clammy. Call a doctor, now." Hands moved fast now, urgent, efficient. Funny how quickly the room learned to care. The boy drifted in and out, voices echoing above him, distant and warped. As someone lifted his arm, the bracelet slid into view under the harsh lights. The doctor knelt down, reached for the boy's wrist and froze. He leaned closer, read it once, then again. His face changed completely. "What the hell?" he muttered. Then, louder, sharp as a blade. "Why wasn't this child triaged immediately?" The room went silent, and in that silence, everything began to change. Who ignored this child? Dr. Michael Harris didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The question cut through the emergency room like a scalpel, sharp and precise, slicing straight through the noise that had exploded moments earlier. Nurses froze mid-motion. A gurney stood half-turned. The man who'd been yelling about his ankle pain fell silent, suddenly aware that something serious was unfolding right in front of him. No one answered. Dr. Harris was already reaching for the boy's wrist again, his fingers gentle but urgent. The bracelet was old, the plastic scratched and clouded from years of wear. The black lettering faded but still legible if you knew what to look for. And Dr. Harris knew. His jaw tightened as he read it fully now, not just the top line, but the medical code etched beneath the name. Congenital cardiomyopathy, high risk, immediate evaluation required. His stomach dropped. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. This child should have been triaged the moment he walked in, Dr. Harris said, his voice dangerously calm. Do you have any idea what could have happened? The nurse who told the boy to take a seat opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her face had gone pale, the color draining away as the realization hit her all at once. She had seen the bracelet. She just hadn't looked at it, We're moving him now, Dr. Harris snapped. Gurney, oxygen, cardiac monitor now. The ER sprang to life, with a new kind of urgency, one that carried fear beneath the efficiency. Someone ran for equipment. Another nurse cleared a path. The boy was lifted carefully, his small body alarmingly light in their hands. As they moved him, his eyes fluttered open briefly. "Am I in trouble?" he whispered, voice barely there. Dr. Harris leaned close, keeping pace beside the gurney. "No," he said firmly. "You did exactly the right thing." The boy's brow furrowed weakly. "But they said—" "I know what they said," the doctor replied. "But I see you now." The words landed heavier than he intended, because it was the truth. They rolled him down the hallway, the wheels of the gurney rattling softly against the floor, past curtained bays and startled faces. Monitors beeped erratically now, the sound sharp and insistent, impossible to ignore. The nurse jogged beside them, hands shaking as she adjusted the oxygen mask over the boy's face. "What's his blood pressure?" Dr. Harris asked. "Low," came the reply. "Dropping." The doctor swore under his breath. If the boy had waited much longer, this would have been a very different night. As they burst through the doors to the cardiac assessment room, Dr. Harris finally allowed himself a second to think about the timing, the waiting, the dismissal, the assumptions. All of it had added up to a dangerous delay. Inside the room, the boy was transferred onto a bed, wires and sensors quickly attached to his chest and arms. The cardiac monitor sprang to life, jagged lines dancing across the screen in a pattern that made Dr. Harris's chest tighten. This wasn't mild. This wasn't anxiety. This was real. "Prep labs," he ordered. "I want an echo immediately." A younger nurse hesitated. "Doctor, he's alone." Dr. Harris paused just for a second. "Then we move faster," he said, "not slower." The boy's breathing was labored now, each inhale a visible effort. His small hand twitched weakly, fingers brushing against the bracelet again. Dr. Harris noticed. "Hey," he said softly, placing a steady hand over the boy's wrist. "You can relax, we've got you." The boy nodded faintly. "My grandma. She told me to wear it," he murmured. Dr. Harris swallowed. "She was right," he said. "She was very right." Outside the room, the emergency department buzzed with whispers. "Did you see that? That kid just collapsed." Doctor looked freaked out. The nurse who had waved the boy off stood near the wall, arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring at the floor. Her mind replayed the moment he'd stood at the desk, small and hesitant, asking for help. "Take a seat." The words echoed in her head, louder now than they had sounded when she'd said them. Another nurse approached cautiously. "Hey, you okay?" She shook her head slowly. "I didn't think—" She started, then stopped. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't sound like an excuse. Because it was. Inside the assessment room, Dr. Harris studied the monitor, his brow furrowed deeply. He'd seen this pattern before, but never in someone so young. "How long was he waiting?" he asked quietly. The nurse checked the intake log. "About 20 minutes. Dr. Harris exhaled sharply. 20 minutes. In cardiac cases like this, 20 minutes could be the difference between recovery and irreversible damage. Or worse. He glanced down at the boy again. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Eli," the boy whispered. "Okay, Eli. I'm Dr. Harris. I'm going to take care of you, all right?" Eli's eyes flicked toward the door. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Something in Dr. Harris's expression hardened. "You didn't," he said. "You were the only one doing what you were supposed to." The echo technician arrived, rolling equipment into the room. As the exam began, Dr. Harris watched the screen intently, his jaw tightening with every image. This condition wasn't new. It hadn't appeared tonight. Eli had been living with it for years, managed, monitored, protected, until tonight. The technician glanced up at him. "This is serious," she said quietly. "I know," Dr. Harris replied. As the test continued, something tugged at the back of his mind. The name on the bracelet, Eli Thompson, and beneath it, in smaller print, a contact name, Margaret Thompson. Dr. Harris felt a strange chill run through him. He knew that name. He straightened slowly, memories surfacing unbidden. Margaret Thompson had been a nurse here, not just any nurse, a cardiac nurse, one of the best. She had trained half the department over the years, known for her precision, her calm under pressure, her fierce advocacy for patients who couldn't speak for themselves. She had retired quietly a few years back, and then she passed away, the boy had said. Dr. Harris closed his eyes briefly. Of course. It clicked into place now, the bracelet, the insistence, the promise. Margaret Thompson had known exactly how dangerous this condition could be. She had known what could happen if someone didn't listen. And now her grandson was lying on a hospital bed, struggling to breathe because someone hadn't. The irony was brutal. Dr. Harris stepped out of the room, motioning for the charge nurse to follow him. "How did this happen?" he asked quietly. But there was steel beneath the question. The charge nurse hesitated. "He came in alone," she said. "Pediatric cases usually—" "Don't," Dr. Harris cut her off. "Don't justify it." He gestured back toward the room. That child had a medical ID clearly visible, a known, high-risk cardiac condition, and he was told to sit down. The charge nurse's face tightened. "We're reviewing it," she said. "We will." Dr. Harris nodded once. "You'd better," he replied, "because if he hadn't collapsed out there, we might be having a very different conversation right now." Back inside, Eli stirred slightly as the tests continued. His breathing steadied a little with the oxygen, but his face remained pale, lips tinged faintly blue. Dr. Harris returned to his side. "You're doing great," he said softly. "Just keep breathing." Eli swallowed. "Am I going to die?" he asked. The question was small, honest, terrifying. Dr. Harris didn't hesitate. "No," he said firmly, "not tonight." Eli nodded, trusting him completely. That trust sat heavy on Dr. Harris's chest, because it had nearly been broken before he ever got the chance to earn it. Outside the room, the emergency department continued on, patients coming and going, but something had shifted. People glanced toward the assessment room more often now. The whispers had changed tone. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was reckoning. The nurse who'd dismissed Eli sat down heavily in a chair, head in her hands. She hadn't meant to hurt him. But intent didn't matter. Impact did. And the impact of ignoring a child begging for help was now playing out behind closed doors. As the cardiac team prepared for the next steps, Dr. Harris looked once more at the bracelet, catching the light as Eli's wrist shifted slightly. Margaret Thompson had tried to protect him. Tonight, the system had failed her, but it wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, because what happened next wouldn't just determine Eli's fate, it would expose everything that went wrong before he ever collapsed. The cardiac monitor let out a sharp, uneven beep. Dr. Harris's eyes snapped back to the screen. Eli's heart rate was climbing too fast now, erratic spikes followed by worrying drops. His small chest rose and fell under the thin hospital blanket, each breath shallow, like his body was fighting a battle it didn't fully understand. "Pressure's unstable," the nurse said, trying to keep her voice steady. "How unstable?" Dr. Harris asked. "Lower than it should be, trending down." Dr. Harris nodded once, already thinking 3 steps ahead. He adjusted the IV line, watching Eli's face closely for any sign of panic. The boy's eyes were open now, glassy but alert, darting between the faces around him. Too many strangers, too many wires. Eli swallowed hard. Am I okay?" he asked. Dr. Harris leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Eli could hear. "You're in the right place now," he said. "That's what matters." The words were true. They were also painfully late. As the team worked, Dr. Harris's mind kept circling back to the same thought. This didn't have to be this bad. If Eli had been assessed when he first walked in, if someone had taken 30 seconds to read the bracelet, this could have been managed calmly, methodically. Instead, they were racing the clock. Outside the assessment room, the charge nurse stood with a tablet in her hands, staring at the intake timeline like it might rewrite itself if she looked long enough. Arrival, 9:41 p.m. Collapse, 10:03 p.m. 22 minutes. 22 minutes of waiting. 22 minutes of assumptions. She pinched the bridge of her nose, a familiar headache beginning to form. "We need to document this," she said quietly to another supervisor. "All of it." The other woman nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. "There's already talk," she replied. "People saw him go down out there." Of course they did. It hadn't been subtle. A child collapsing in a waiting room had a way of cutting through distractions, of forcing people to look at what they'd been ignoring. Back inside, Dr. Harris watched as the echo results came in. His jaw clenched. The images confirmed what he already suspected. Eli's heart was struggling, not failing yet, but dangerously close, to a threshold where intervention would no longer be optional. "Get cardiology on the line," he ordered. "Now!" A nurse moved quickly to comply. Eli shifted slightly, his fingers brushing against the bracelet again. Dr. Harris noticed the small, almost unconscious movement. "Your grandma was very smart," he said gently. Eli blinked. "She always said, 'Hospitals don't always listen,'" he murmured. "That's why this." His voice trailed off. Dr. Harris felt something tighten in his chest. "She was right," he said again, more quietly this time. As the cardiologist's voice crackled through the speakerphone, Dr. Harris summarized the situation with clinical precision, but his frustration bled through despite his efforts to contain it. 10-year-old male, known congenital cardiomyopathy, medical ID bracelet present, delayed triage, collapsed in waiting area, he said. There was a pause on the other end. "Delayed how long?" the cardiologist asked. Dr. Harris hesitated for half a second. "Over 20 minutes. Another pause. "That's unacceptable," came the reply. Dr. Harris didn't argue. Because it was. The cardiologist continued, outlining immediate next steps, medications to stabilize Eli's heart rhythm, contingencies if his condition worsened. Dr. Harris listened closely, nodding, issuing instructions to the team as they went. The room buzzed with controlled urgency. This was the kind of situation medical professionals trained for, the kind they took pride in handling well. But none of that erased the fact that it had only become urgent because it had first been dismissed. Eli's breathing hitched suddenly, a sharp gasp escaping his lips. "Hey! Hey!" Dr. Harris said quickly, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Easy! You're okay." Eli shook his head weakly. "It feels tight," he whispered, "like something squeezing." "I know," Dr. Harris said. "We're giving you something to help." The medication flowed into the IV line, clear and unassuming, but powerful. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the monitor's frantic rhythm began to ease. Not normal, but better. Dr. Harris exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. "That's it," he murmured. "Good job, Eli. Just keep breathing." Eli nodded faintly, eyelids fluttering. Outside, the waiting room had fallen into an uneasy quiet. Conversations were hushed now, eyes flicking toward the closed assessment room doors. The man with the ankle injury sat uncomfortably in his chair, replaying the moment the boy had slid to the floor. He felt a twist of guilt in his stomach. He'd complained loudly, demanded attention. The kid hadn't. A woman whispered to her partner, "He was there before us." The partner frowned. "They didn't call him?" She shook her head. "No." The truth settled heavily among the waiting patients, a collective discomfort that no one quite knew how to address. Near the wall, the nurse who'd dismissed Eli sat rigidly, staring straight ahead. Her supervisor approached quietly, tablet in hand. "We're going to talk about what happened," the supervisor said, "but not right now." The nurse nodded numbly. "I didn't think—" she began, then stopped. The supervisor met her eyes. "That's the problem," she said gently but firmly. "You didn't think. You assumed." The words stung because they were accurate. Back in the assessment room, Dr. Harris finally allowed himself to glance at the clock. 10:27 p.m. They were stabilizing Eli, but the night was far from over. He would need to be admitted, monitored, possibly transferred to a pediatric cardiac unit if things didn't continue to improve. Dr. Harris looked down at the boy again. "Do you know where your parents are?" he asked softly. Eli shook his head. "My mom died when I was little," he said. "My dad, I don't know." The words were simple, practiced, like he'd had to say them many times before. "And your grandma?" Dr. Harris asked, though he already knew the answer. "She passed last year." Dr. Harris nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. Eli shrugged weakly. "She said I'd be okay," he replied. "She said if anything ever happened, doctors would help me." Dr. Harris felt the weight of that trust settle heavily on his shoulders. Tonight, that promise had almost been broken. As the cardiac team finalized their plan, Dr. Harris stepped out of the room again, this time motioning for hospital administration to join him. "This can't be brushed off," he said quietly but firmly. "We're talking about a child with a known condition, being ignored until he collapsed." The administrator nodded, face serious. "We're opening a full review," she said, "effective immediately." "It needs to be more than a review," Dr. Harris replied. "This is a systems failure." "I agree," she said, "and so will the board." Dr. Harris watched her walk away, then turned back toward the assessment room. Through the glass, he could see Eli lying still now, chest rising more evenly, surrounded by machines that were finally doing their job. He thought of Margaret Thompson, of how fiercely she'd advocated for patients who couldn't speak up, of how she'd warned about exactly this kind of complacency, and of how close they'd come to proving her right in the worst possible way. Dr. Harris re-entered the room, pulling a chair up beside Eli's bed. "I'm right here," he said quietly. Eli's eyes fluttered open. "You won't leave?" he asked. Dr. Harris shook his head. "Not a chance." Eli's breathing steadied further, comforted by the certainty in his voice. But as Dr. Harris sat there watching the monitors, he knew something else was coming, because what happened in that waiting room wasn't just a medical issue, it was a moral one, and by morning it would demand answers far beyond this room. By the time midnight crept across the digital clocks in St. Margaret's Hospital, the emergency department looked the same on the surface. Patients waited, monitors beeped, staff moved with practiced efficiency. But underneath, something had shifted. Eli lay in a quiet room now, no longer in the chaos of the ER, his condition stabilized enough to move him upstairs. The machines around him hummed softly, less frantic than before, though still alert, always watching. Dr. Harris stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the steady rhythm of Eli's heart on the monitor. It wasn't perfect, but it was holding. For now. Outside the room, a different kind of emergency was unfolding. The charge nurse sat in a small conference room with 2 administrators and a representative from risk management. The door was closed, but voices leaked through the thin walls in sharp, clipped tones. "We have to document the exact timeline," one administrator said, "minute by minute." "It's already been requested," the risk manager replied. "If this becomes a legal issue, and it might, we need accuracy." The charge nurse nodded, jaw tight. "There were assumptions made," she said carefully. "Wrong ones." "That's putting it mildly," the administrator said. No one argued. On the table lay printed intake logs, security timestamps, and a still image pulled from the waiting room camera. Eli sitting alone in his chair, shoulders hunched, head down, almost blending into the background. It was uncomfortable to look at. "He was visible the entire time," the risk manager said quietly. "No obstruction, no confusion." The charge nurse swallowed. "Yes," she said. "He was." Down the hall, the nurse who had dismissed Eli sat alone in a break room, hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup she hadn't touched. The coffee had gone cold long ago. She replayed the night in her head on an endless loop. The way he'd stood there, the way he'd spoken softly, the bracelet she'd noticed but hadn't read. She hadn't meant to ignore him. She'd just been tired, busy, used to filtering. And now, sitting alone with her thoughts, she realized something that made her stomach twist. Filtering was exactly the problem. At 12:17 a.m., Dr. Harris was asked to join the meeting. He arrived still wearing his white coat, stethoscope slung loosely around his neck. He didn't sit when offered a chair. "I want to be clear," he said, arms crossed. "This wasn't a borderline case." The room went silent. "This was a pediatric patient with a visible medical ID indicating high-risk cardiac disease," he continued. "He presented with chest pain. He was ignored until he collapsed." One of the administrators shifted uncomfortably. "We understand the severity," she said. Dr. Harris shook his head. "I don't think you do," he replied, "because if you did, this conversation would have happened years ago." The words hung heavy. The risk manager cleared her throat. "Doctor, we're initiating a formal internal review," she said, "but we also need to understand if there were contributing factors." Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly. "There always are," he said, "but don't confuse explanation with excuse." No one interrupted him. "Contributing factors don't change the outcome," he went on. "A child was left untreated because someone decided he didn't require urgency. That decision almost killed him." The administrator nodded slowly. "We'll speak with the staff involved," she said. "Immediately." "You should," Dr. Harris replied, "and not just the ones on duty tonight." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this isn't about one nurse," he said. "This is about a culture that teaches people to prioritize some patients over others based on how they present." Silence, because everyone in the room knew he was right. While the meeting continued, Eli stirred upstairs, eyes fluttering open. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of monitors and a small lamp near the bed. He felt groggy, heavy, like his limbs were filled with sand. A woman sat beside him, not a nurse, not a doctor. She wore a simple blazer and held a clipboard loosely in her lap. "Hey," she said softly when she noticed his eyes open. "I'm Karen. I work with the hospital." Isaki blinked. "Am I in trouble?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Karen's expression softened. "No," she said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded faintly, the familiar knot in his chest tightening slightly. She glanced at the bracelet on his wrist, then back at him. "Do you know why you wear that?" she asked. "My grandma told me," he said. "She said it helps people know." Karen swallowed. "And did it?" she asked quietly. Eli hesitated. "I don't know," he said honestly. Karen closed her eyes for just a moment, then opened them again. "It should have," she said, "and we're going to make sure it always does." Eli didn't fully understand what she meant, but her tone was serious, different from the rushed voices he'd heard earlier. She wasn't in a hurry. "Do you have anyone you want us to call?" she asked. Eli shook his head. "No one," he said. "It was just me and Grandma." Karen nodded, her jaw tightening slightly. "We'll make sure you're not alone," she said. Downstairs, the nurse, who dismissed Eli, was finally called into an office. She walked slowly, each step heavier than the last. Inside, 2 supervisors waited. "Have a seat," one of them said. She did. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. "We need you to walk us through what happened tonight," the supervisor said calmly. The nurse took a breath. "I told him to sit down," she said quietly. I assumed." Her voice broke. "I didn't think it was serious." The supervisor nodded. "And the bracelet?" she asked. The nurse's eyes filled with tears. "I saw it," she admitted. "I just didn't read it." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The supervisor closed her notebook. "That decision," she said carefully, "will be reviewed." The nurse nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she whispered. "I know," the supervisor replied, "but intent doesn't erase impact." Back upstairs, Dr. Harris stood outside Eli's room, watching him through the glass. Karen stepped out to join him. "He's awake," she said, "asking questions." Dr. Harris nodded. "He should," he said. "He deserves answers." Karen hesitated. "There's something else," she said. "Risk management pulled his grandmother's file." Dr. Harris turned sharply. "What did they find?" Karen exhaled. "Margaret Thompson filed 3 internal complaints during her time here," she said. "All about delayed care, all about assumptions being made." Dr. Harris felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "She warned us," he said quietly. "Yes," Karen replied, "and tonight we proved her right." The realization hung between them, heavy and damning. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern, and patterns demanded accountability. As Dr. Harris turned back toward Eli's room, his resolve hardened. This couldn't end with quiet apologies and paperwork. Because if it did, nothing would change, and the next child might not collapse in time to be saved. Inside the room, Eli watched the door, his small fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, bracelet still visible against his skin. He didn't know it yet, but what happened to him tonight was already rippling outward, far beyond these walls, and by morning the hospital would be forced to confront something it had ignored for far too long. The file was thinner than Dr. Harris expected. He stood alone in a quiet office near the administrative wing, the fluorescent lights humming softly above him as he flipped through the pages. Margaret Thompson, employee ID number faded at the top. 32 years of service, commendations, certifications, performance reviews, and complaints. 3 of them, each neatly typed, each time-stamped years apart, each flagged, reviewed, and quietly closed. Dr. Harris read the first one slowly. Concern regarding delayed triage for pediatric patients presenting without guardians. Observed pattern of assumptions based on appearance and behavior. He felt his jaw tighten. The second complaint went further. Repeated dismissal of visible medical IDs during intake. High-risk patients asked to wait due to perceived low urgency. And the third The third was the most unsettling. If we continue treating silence as stability, we will eventually harm someone who trusted us to listen. Dr. Harris lowered the file slowly. Margaret Thompson hadn't just been a nurse. She had been a warning, and they had ignored her, just as they had ignored her grandson. Down the hall, Eli slept fitfully, his small chest rising and falling under the thin hospital blanket. Machines monitored his every breath now, alert and unblinking, doing what human eyes had failed to do earlier. Karen sat at his bedside, jotting notes on her clipboard. She wasn't there as an administrator anymore. She was there as a witness. Every so often, Eli stirred, his fingers curling around the bracelet on his wrist even in sleep. The plastic caught the light, its surface worn smooth from years of constant touch. Karen watched it. Closely. That bracelet had done its job. It had warned them. The system just hadn't listened. At 2:06 a.m., the hospital's on-call legal counsel joined the conversation, not in person, by phone. "This has exposure written all over it," the voice said flatly through the speaker. "Minor patient, known condition, delayed care." The administrator pinched the bridge of her nose. "We're aware," she said. "We're conducting an internal review." "That won't be enough," legal counsel replied. "If this gets out, and it will, the narrative writes itself." She didn't argue, because it already had. A child ignored, a collapse, a bracelet no one read. Outside the hospital, the city slept, unaware of the reckoning quietly building inside St. Margaret's walls. But not everyone was asleep. Across town, a night shift reporter scrolled through police scanner chatter and hospital alerts, her attention caught by a brief mention. Pediatric collapse, delayed response. It wasn't much, but it was enough. To make her sit up straighter, she typed a quick note to herself. "Check this in the morning." Back inside, the nurse who dismissed Eli sat alone in her car in the parking garage, forehead resting against the steering wheel. She hadn't been allowed back on the floor. Told to go home and wait for HR to contact her, she replayed the moment again. The way he'd said, "It hurts." The way she hadn't listened, she hadn't slept. She doubted she would. Upstairs, Dr. Harris returned to Eli's room, pulling a chair closer to the bed. Eli stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Doctor?" he murmured. "I'm here," Dr. Harris said softly. Eli swallowed. "Did I do something wrong?" The question landed heavy. "No," Dr. Harris said immediately. "You did everything right." Eli frowned slightly. "Then why didn't they help me?" Dr. Harris hesitated. "Because there was no answer that wouldn't hurt." "Sometimes," he said carefully, "adults make mistakes." Eli nodded slowly, absorbing that. "My grandma used to say that," he whispered. "She said hospitals forget sometimes." Dr. Harris closed his eyes briefly. "She tried to remind us," he said, "and we should have listened." Eli's fingers tightened around the blanket. "Is she mad at me?" he asked. Dr. Harris felt his throat tighten. "No," he said firmly. "She'd be proud of you." Eli nodded, comforted by the certainty in his voice. As dawn crept closer, the hospital's leadership gathered again, this time with heavier faces and fewer excuses. "This can't be contained," one administrator admitted. "Too many people saw it. And too many records exist," another added. Karen placed Margaret Thompson's file on the table. "This isn't just about tonight," she said. "This is about years." Silence followed. They all knew what was coming. Policy changes, public statements, accountability, but also something harder, an admission that they had failed someone who trusted them. At 6:41 a.m., Eli was transferred to a pediatric cardiac unit at a partner hospital. The ambulance crew moved carefully, respectfully, fully briefed. As they wheeled him out, staff lined the hallway. No one spoke. Some bowed their heads. Others met his eyes, shame flickering across their faces. Eli clutched his bracelet, looking around in quiet confusion. Dr. Harris walked beside the gurney until the doors. "You're going to be okay," he said. Eli nodded. "Will you tell people?" he asked suddenly. Dr. Harris paused. "Tell them what?" he asked. "That they should listen," Eli said. "Before it's too late." Dr. Harris felt something shift inside him. "Yes," he said, "I promise." As the ambulance doors closed and pulled away, the hospital stood in the pale light of morning, unchanged in brick and glass, but cracked at its foundation. Because the story of a boy and a bracelet was no longer contained within its walls. It was moving outward now, and once it did, there would be no going back. The story didn't explode. It leaked, quietly at first, like water seeping through cracks. No one wanted to acknowledge. By mid-morning, a short internal memo circulated among St. Margaret's staff, carefully worded, vague. It referenced a pediatric incident, a delay in intake, and a commitment to review procedures. No names, no details, no accountability. But hospitals are ecosystems, and ecosystems talk. A nurse mentioned it in passing to a friend at another hospital. A paramedic brought it up over coffee at the station. A unit clerk whispered about the collapse to her sister, who happened to work in local news. By noon, the reporter from the night shift was calling the hospital's communications office. "Can you confirm a pediatric cardiac emergency last night?" she asked calmly. The woman on the other end hesitated. "We can't comment on patient care," she replied. That was all the confirmation the reporter needed, because silence in stories like this speaks loudly. Across town, Eli lay in a pediatric cardiac unit, sunlight filtering softly through a narrow window. He looked smaller in the large hospital bed, wires still attached, machines still watching, but he was awake. A nurse adjusted his IV, smiling gently. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better," Eli said. She nodded. "That's good. You scared a lot of people." Eli frowned. "I didn't mean to," he said. She paused, then shook her head. "You didn't scare us," she said. "You reminded us." Eli didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. Down the hall, Dr. Harris stood with a pediatrics cardiologist, reviewing scans. "He's stable," the cardiologist said. "But this was close." Dr. Harris nodded. "I know." If he'd waited another 10 minutes, the cardiologist began, then stopped. They didn't need to finish the sentence. Back at St. Margaret's, the administration was already in damage control mode. A meeting was called. Then another. Legal, HR, communications. Everyone had a role. No one wanted responsibility. "We need to get ahead of this," the communications director said. "If media picks it up, we frame it as a rare oversight." Dr. Harris, invited this time, shook his head. "It wasn't rare," he said. "It was predictable." The room went quiet. "We have data," he continued. "Complaints, prior warnings. This wasn't an anomaly." The HR director frowned. "Doctor, with respect, you're crossing into policy matters." Dr. Harris met her gaze. "With respect," he replied. "Policy nearly killed a child." Silence again. That afternoon, the reporter received an anonymous email. No name, no signature, just 3 attachments, a time-stamped intake log, a still frame from the waiting room camera, and a photo, a close-up of a faded medical bracelet on a child's wrist. The subject line read, "They told him to sit down." The reporter stared at her screen. She didn't need more. By evening, the first article went live. The headline was careful, restrained. "Questions raised after child suffers cardiac emergency following ER wait." But readers didn't miss the point. Comments poured in within minutes. Why was a child waiting? Why didn't anyone check him? Why does this keep happening? Social media picked it up next. The image of the bracelet spread fast. People zoomed in on it, shared it, argued over it. Some defended the hospital, others didn't. Many saw something familiar in it. At St. Margaret's, staff began checking their phones between patients. The nurse who dismissed Eli saw the headline on her screen and felt her stomach drop. She didn't read the comments. She didn't have to. She already knew what they would say. At 8:42 p.m., the hospital released a statement. Carefully crafted, approved by legal. We take patient safety seriously. We are reviewing our procedures. Our thoughts are with the child and his family. No apology, no acknowledgement of fault. Dr. Harris read it and closed his laptop slowly. That won't hold, he muttered. He was right. Because the next morning, a second story broke. This one wasn't about the incident. It was about Margaret Thompson. A former colleague had spoken up. She warned them, the source said, more than once. The article included excerpts from her complaints, her words, her warnings. The final line cut deep. If we continue treating silence as stability, someone will get hurt. The public reaction shifted. This wasn't just about one night anymore. It was about a system that ignored a woman when she spoke and ignored her grandson when he came back. Outside St. Margaret's, a small group gathered with signs. Nothing aggressive, just words. Listen to patients. Silence isn't safety. Read the bracelet. Inside, leadership watched from conference room windows, faces pale. This is escalating, the communications director said quietly. Yes, the administrator replied, and we deserve it. That night, Eli watched the news from his hospital bed, the volume low. He didn't fully understand what he was seeing, just his own bracelet on the screen, enlarged, magnified. A nurse noticed. Do you want me to turn it off? She asked gently. Eli shook his head. They're talking about Grandma, he said. The nurse nodded. She sounds like she was a good nurse, she said. She was, Eli replied. She said doctors save lives, but listening saves people. The nurse smiled sadly. She was right. As the camera panned over St. Margaret's lit up against the dark sky, the reporter's voice carried one final line. Hospital officials say a full review is underway, but for many, the question remains. Why did it take a child collapsing on the floor for anyone to listen? In a quiet office miles away, Dr. Harris watched the broadcast and felt the weight of what was coming settle fully onto his shoulders. This was no longer just a medical story. It was a moral one, and it was only just beginning. By the third day, St. Margaret's Hospital no longer controlled the narrative. The review that administrators had hoped to keep internal was now being demanded from the outside. Emails poured in from regulators, advocacy groups and legal representatives asking the same questions in different words. Why was a child with chest pain left waiting? Why was a visible medical ID ignored? Why had prior warnings gone unaddressed? There were no good answers. At 9 a.m. sharp, the hospital's board of directors convened an emergency session. No press, no staff. Just 12 people sitting around a polished table, each aware that their decisions in the next few hours would define the institution's future. The CEO cleared his throat. We need to take decisive action, he said. Symbolic action won't be enough. The head of HR nodded. The nurse involved has been placed on administrative leave, she reported. Pending investigation. Is she the only one? A board member asked quietly. The room stilled. No, the HR director admitted. She isn't. Because the truth had become impossible to ignore. This wasn't about one person. It was about layers, policies that encouraged speed over listening, training that treated silence as safety, a culture that rewarded efficiency more than empathy. Dr. Harris had been invited to speak. He stood at the far end of the room, hands clasped behind his back. You want accountability? He said calmly. Then don't stop at the surface. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. You ignored Margaret Thompson, he continued. She warned you repeatedly, and now her grandson almost paid for it with his life. No one interrupted him. Suspending one nurse won't fix that, he added. It just gives you a scapegoat. The CEO exhaled slowly. What would you suggest? He asked. Dr. Harris met his gaze. Start by admitting failure, he said, publicly. The word hung in the air. Failure. At the same time, across town, Eli sat propped up in his hospital bed, watching a cartoon with the sound turned low. His condition had stabilized further, though he still tired easily. A pediatric cardiologist sat with him, explaining things carefully. You're going to need regular checkups, she said, but you caught this in time. Eli nodded. Because of my bracelet? He asked. She smiled gently. Yes, she said. Because of your bracelet. He touched it thoughtfully. My grandma said people don't always listen, he murmured. The doctor hesitated. Sometimes, she said, we have to remind them how. Back at St. Margaret's, the nurse who had dismissed Eli was formally notified of the investigation. The email was brief, professional, final. She read it twice, then closed her laptop. She thought of the boy's face, not angry, just scared, and she wondered how long that look would follow her. By midday, the State Health Department announced an external review. The news broke quickly. St. Margaret's Hospital under investigation. The headlines spread. Patients cancelled appointments. Staff whispered in hallways. Phones rang non-stop. Inside a small office, Karen sat with legal counsel, reviewing documents. They're asking for all internal complaints related to delayed care, the lawyer said. Karen slid Margaret Thompson's file across the table. Start with this, she said. The lawyer read silently, then looked up. This is damning, he said. Yes, Karen replied. It is. That afternoon, a press conference was scheduled. Cameras lined the sidewalk outside the hospital. Reporters checked notes, tested microphones. The CEO stepped to the podium, face tight, voice controlled. We acknowledge that a child under our care experienced a delay that should not have happened, he said. We are deeply reviewing our processes. A reporter raised her hand. Why did it take a child collapsing for anyone to listen? The CEO hesitated, because there was no prepared answer for that. Upstairs, Dr. Harris watched the broadcast on a small screen in the staff lounge. He felt no satisfaction, only resolve, because the hardest part was still ahead. Across the city, Eli's story continued to spread, shared by people who saw pieces of themselves in it. Parents, patients, former nurses. The comments were raw. This happened to me. They ignored my pain too. Why does it always take tragedy? Eli didn't read the comments. He was focused on something else. The next day, Karen visited him again. There are people who want to meet you, she said gently. Eli looked up, wary. Am I in trouble? He asked. She smiled sadly. No, she said. They want to learn from you. Eli considered that. Will it help other kids? He asked. Karen nodded. Yes, she said, it already is. He thought for a moment, then nodded too. Okay, he said. As the hospital grappled with investigations, suspensions and public scrutiny, one truth became impossible to escape. The system had failed. And systems don't change quietly. They change because someone is brave enough to expose them. And the smallest voice in the room had done exactly that. But the reckoning wasn't over. Because next came the question no institution ever wants to face. What does real accountability actually look like? The boardroom was silent when the vote was called. 12 people, 12 folders, 12 decisions that could no longer be delayed. The chairman cleared his throat. All in favor of implementing the full corrective action package, raise your hand. One by one, hands went up. Not because everyone agreed, but because no one could afford not to. The decision wasn't symbolic, it was surgical. Mandatory retraining for all intake staff. Immediate. Revision of triage protocols. Independent oversight for pediatric cases. Public acknowledgement of institutional failure. And something that made the room noticeably uncomfortable. Personnel consequences. The CEO read the final item aloud. Effective immediately, the Director of Emergency Services is relieved of duty. A murmur rippled through the room. That role had been untouched for years, protected until now. This isn't about punishment, the chairman said quietly. It's about responsibility. Outside the room, staff waited, tension thick in the air. Some stared at their phones, others avoided eye contact entirely. When the announcement came, it spread fast. Suspensions confirmed, leadership reshuffled, external oversight imposed. The hospital's public statement followed within the hour. This time, there was no vague language. "We failed a child," it read. "And that failure exposed weaknesses in our system that we are committed to correcting." The word failed hit harder than any apology. Across town, Eli watched the press conference from his bed, Dr. Harris standing quietly beside him. "They're saying sorry," Eli said. Dr. Harris nodded. "Yes," he replied. "But sorry isn't the end." Eli thought about that. "Will they listen now?" he asked. Dr. Harris hesitated. "They'll have to," he said, "because people are watching." And they were. Advocacy groups released statements. Medical boards demanded reports. Parents asked uncomfortable questions. The hospital, that had once operated quietly, now stood under a spotlight it couldn't escape. That evening, a reporter requested an interview with Eli. Karen brought the question to him carefully. "You don't have to," she said. "At all." Eli looked down at his bracelet. "If I talk," he asked, "will it help?" Karen nodded. "Yes," she said, "it will." He thought for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. "But I want to talk about Grandma." The interview aired the next night. Eli sat in a chair too big for him, feet dangling slightly above the floor. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "My grandma said hospitals are full of good people," he said. "But good people still have to listen." The reporter asked him how it felt to be ignored. Eli shrugged. "It felt like I wasn't real," he said. That line traveled fast. It was quoted, shared, remembered. Inside St. Margaret's, staff watched the interview in silence. Some cried, others stared at the floor. Because the truth was simple and devastating. A child had told them exactly how their system made him feel, and no policy could erase that. Late that night, Dr. Harris received an email. The subject line read, "Margaret Thompson Memorial Initiative." He opened it slowly. The hospital board had approved the creation of a permanent program in her name, focused on patient advocacy, intake accountability, and mandatory bracelet verification, a reminder built into the system. Dr. Harris leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. It was something, but he knew better than to mistake action for absolution. Change was fragile. It required vigilance. Upstairs, Eli slept peacefully for the first time in days. The machines hummed softly, no alarms, no urgency. Karen stood at the door, watching him, then glanced at the bracelet one more time. Such a small thing, such a powerful one. The next morning, St. Margaret's opened its doors as usual, but nothing felt usual anymore. Every intake nurse checked wrists carefully. Every supervisor asked more questions. Every delay felt heavier, because now there was a name attached to the silence, and it wouldn't be forgotten. But one final question remained unanswered. What would happen to Eli after the cameras left, and would the system remember him once the spotlight faded? Those answers were still to come. The news cycle moved on the way it always did. A new scandal replaced the last one. A different outrage took center stage. Headlines changed. But for Eli, nothing simply went back to normal. 2 weeks after the collapse, he was discharged from the pediatric cardiac unit with a folder thicker than his school backpack. Follow-up appointments, medication schedules, emergency instructions printed in bold red letters, and a new bracelet. This one was brighter, clearer, impossible to miss. Still, Eli kept the old one too. He wore it sometimes at home, slipping it on quietly when he felt nervous, like a reminder of everything that had happened and everything that had almost been taken from him. Karen continued to check in long after her official role had ended. She helped arrange transportation to appointments, connected Eli with a counselor who specialized in medical trauma, because no one collapsed in an ER and walked away untouched. At night, Eli sometimes dreamed of the waiting room, the chairs, the clock, the feeling of being invisible. He woke up breathing fast, heart racing, fingers instinctively searching for his wrist. The bracelet was always there. That helped. At St. Margaret's, the changes were real, but uneven. Some staff embraced them fully, checking and double-checking, asking more questions, slowing down when it mattered. Others resented the scrutiny. "They're overreacting," one nurse muttered in the break room. "One incident shouldn't define us." Dr. Harris heard the comment and said nothing, because he knew better. One incident didn't define them, but how they responded to it would. The Margaret Thompson Memorial Initiative launched quietly at first. Training sessions, new signage, mandatory verification protocols built into the intake software. But its real impact wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the pauses, the extra second before dismissing a child's complaint, the glance at a wrist before telling someone to wait, the question asked instead of assumed. Eli returned to St. Margaret's once, months later, for a scheduled follow-up. The lobby looked the same, but it felt different. The intake nurse smiled and knelt slightly to meet his eye level. "What brings you in today?" she asked gently. Eli hesitated, then answered. "My heart," he said. She nodded and glanced at his bracelet immediately. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "We'll take good care of you." Eli sat down, heart pounding, not from illness this time, but from memory. Dr. Harris watched from a distance, hands clenched unconsciously. This was the test. No cameras, no reporters, just a child and a system. When Eli was called back, within minutes, Dr. Harris exhaled. It wasn't redemption, but it was progress. Later, Eli asked a question he'd been holding on to for months. "Do you think Grandma knows?" he asked quietly. Dr. Harris looked at him. "Knows what?" "That people listened this time." Dr. Harris thought about Margaret Thompson, about her complaints, her warnings, her grandson. "Yes," he said softly. "I think she does." Eli nodded, satisfied. As time passed, Eli grew stronger. His condition remained serious, but managed. He learned to recognize warning signs, to speak up louder, to trust his instincts. He stopped apologizing when asking for help. At school, when a teacher once told him to wait a minute after he said he felt dizzy, Eli shook his head. "I can't," he said firmly. "It's important." The teacher listened. That mattered. Dr. Harris eventually declined interview requests. The story wasn't his anymore. It belonged to Eli, and to every patient who had ever been told to sit down and wait while something inside them went wrong. The hospital moved forward, scarred but altered. Some leaders resigned, others stayed and tried to rebuild trust. St. Margaret's would never escape what happened, and it shouldn't, because forgetting was how it began. One afternoon, Eli stood in his bedroom holding both bracelets in his hands. The old one, faded and scratched, the new one bright and clear. He slipped the old one into a small box with photos of his grandmother, then he fastened the new one around his wrist, not because he was afraid, but because he was prepared. There was only one thing left, one final lesson, one final reminder, and it would shape the way this story ended. Years later, Eli would still remember the sound of the clock, not the ticking itself, but what it represented, waiting. He was older now, taller, stronger. His heart condition remained part of his life, but it no longer defined it. Regular checkups, medication, routine. He knew his limits, and more importantly, he knew his worth. But sometimes, when he walked into a hospital, that memory came back. The chairs, the silence, the feeling of being invisible, and every time, without fail, his hand went to his wrist. The bracelet. It wasn't fear that made him check it anymore. It was certainty. Eli learned something that night most adults never fully grasp, that systems don't change because they are kind. They change because they are confronted, because someone refuses to stay quiet, because a small voice speaks up. At the exact moment silence becomes dangerous. Margaret Thompson had understood that. She had tried to warn them in life. Her grandson finished the sentence. At St. Margaret's Hospital, the plaque was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Margaret Thompson Memorial Initiative. Listening saves lives. New staff walked past it every day. Some barely noticed, others paused. And that pause mattered. Dr. Harris still worked there, though he'd turned down promotions more than once. He preferred the floor, preferred being close enough to hear when someone spoke softly. He told new interns the same thing every year. Medicine isn't just about what you see, he said. It's about what you choose to listen to. Some nodded. Some didn't understand yet. They would. Eli visited once more, not as a patient but as a guest. A quiet invitation, no press, no cameras. He stood in the same waiting room, same chairs, same clock. But this time, a young nurse noticed him immediately. "Hey," she said warmly. "Can I help you?" Eli smiled. "No," he said. "I just wanted to see it again." She nodded, unsure but kind. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, he heard a familiar phrase behind him. "Excuse me, my chest hurts." Another child, another soft voice. Eli stopped. He turned. And before anyone else could move, before anyone else could decide, Eli spoke. "He needs help," he said calmly, clearly, loud enough. The nurse looked at the child, then at his wrist, then at the bracelet. Everything happened fast after that. As Eli walked out into the sunlight, he felt something settle inside him. Not anger, not sadness, something better, purpose. That night, Eli placed both bracelets on his desk, the old one, the new one, side by side, one a warning, one a promise. He understood now what his grandmother had meant all those years ago. People don't always ignore you because they don't care. Sometimes they ignore you because it's easier. And that's exactly why speaking up matters. So if you ever find yourself in a waiting room, if someone tells you to sit down when something feels wrong, if a voice near you is quiet, shaking, easy to dismiss, listen. And if no one else does, be the one who does. Because silence is not safety, and being seen can save a life. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, share it. Someone out there is still waiting. And remember, listening is a choice. Make the right one.